I think all kindergarteners should know that if a teacher is talking, they shouldn't interrupt.
They need to know to learn math. They need to know how to find their names on desks, like find their names on desks and lock the door if someone's in the restroom. They should know there's a library. They probably need to know how to tie their shoes. Phonograms? E, U, A, O, U, F, F, O, ow. They need to know how to brush their teeth to get ready to go to their first day. Showing friendship, showing virtues, being nice to other people. If they fall, you can help them, bring them right to a teacher. Or like if someone's having a bad day, you can cheer them up. Or something nice.
Hello and welcome. Today we have the privilege to be here with Dr. Dan Scoggin, one of the co-founders of Great Hearts Academies, and we'll chat through a little bit today about what Great Hearts is, how it was born, and what it's all about. So we're excited to have you here today, and Dr. Scoggin, so pleased to be with you.
Well, thank you, Brandon, for having me on.
Yeah, this is wonderful. Well, we'll start with what is the Great Hearts mission statement. You see it there: to cultivate the minds and hearts of students through the pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty. So this is the reason for which Great Hearts was born and still exists almost 25 years later. Dr. Scoggin, what I'm wondering is, could you share just a little bit about the crafting of that mission statement? How did you come up with that, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it?
Well, thank you, Brandon. By the way, it's just a joy to be here with you, because not only are you the superintendent of the Great Hearts Arizona Classical Academies, but you also are dad. And so you and I are sharing our perspective as parents. You and I both taught in classrooms together, and the joy of leading these schools. And this core purpose statement that you just showed there, to cultivate the hearts and minds of students for the pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty. We came up with that core purpose statement. It really defines who we are, the DNA of our organization. It wasn't something that we kind of crafted on a whiteboard in a company retreat. It goes back thousands of years into the heart of what is classical education, informing the mind for truth, moral purpose, our heart for goodness, and our perceptions for beauty. It really defines who is a complete human being, the pursuit of virtue. And that's something we should talk about today. What is virtue and how we're forming these beautiful children and young men and women into great-hearted graduates. And so that purpose statement means a lot to me as a dad, a lot to me as a teacher, and a lot to me as an educator, as I know it does to you.
Yeah, that's really wonderful to think about that kind of triad, right? Someone who's a human being who cares deeply about these things, but then trying to pass it on to your own children and have this instilled and cultivated for them, but then also as someone who's chosen to give in your life to education and doing that for more than just your own children. It's a wonderful work, and just so blessed to be a part of it. It's interesting when I think back. I grew up in Phoenix. I always went to private schools, and then I went to a state university. And so I didn't even know what a charter school was really when I began working for one. So maybe, if you're all right with it, maybe you tell us a little bit about how you all started in the charter space. Why a charter school rather than the kind of typical district model or a private school?
Yeah, that's interesting. When Great Hearts started just with one school 25 years ago, we had thought about starting a private school. And that was before the charter school law came online back in 1994. Arizona was one of the first states to start charter schools. And that was the perfect venue. Our founders reflected on why that would be the best way to implement the Great Hearts model. Because every family can access a classical liberal arts education. So now Great Hearts and its 24 Arizona academies serves students from all different zip codes, all different backgrounds. And that fits with classical education because classical education is built for all students. We think it's the most well-rounded form of education to offer. It's the most humane and generous form of education to form hearts and minds for truth, goodness, and beauty. And before Great Hearts is the largest, it's a nonprofit organization, the largest provider of classical education in the country, started right here in the Valley. Before classical charter schools were started and innovated by Great Hearts, classical education could only be found behind ivy-covered walls in private schools that were inaccessible to most families. And so that's been part of our open door, our open heart approach, is to bring this classical education to every family that thinks it's a good fit, that understands it's a good fit for their child.
Well, it's really interesting as you just share about it. And I know as someone who's been living in it for pushing upwards of 20 years now, I think maybe sometimes I take for granted how wonderful the approach is that really works on the moral cultivation of young people and also their intellectual formation, and that those two things aren't separated, but that they necessarily go hand in hand. I guess as you've spent time just around the country and even outside the country in different educational spaces, why do you think there aren't more people doing this work, right? Why isn't everyone trying to run a classical school? Why is it, to use the kind of refrain or tagline that we sometimes have listed of classical education in revolutionary schools? Why is it still so unique in educational space, do you think?
It's really interesting. That's a question that kind of cuts to the heart of where Great Hearts comes from and in the culture that we live in. And during the rise of progressive education throughout the last century, throughout the 20th century, classical education was dropped and lost from much of educational currency, which is rather sad, because when you go back into previous centuries, classical education was the standard. It was the modus operandi for how forming children, the paideia, shaping young hearts and minds, how it got done. And so what's really exciting about Great Hearts is, even though we're reviving, restoring a form of education that was lost, we're built for the 21st century. This is what is so important, is Great Hearts is not a backward-looking organization, although we love the past, the wisdom and knowledge and classics and ideas and arts of the past. We love that. We're pointing our students towards the present and the future, because we teach students to think deeply, to love lasting things, to be able to solve problems. So a classical education is beautifully current and relevant to the present. And we think that's really important. But there are still a lot of people that don't understand how classical education is so relevant today. They think, well, where are the laptops? Where are the cell phones? Give every kid a cell phone, teach them AI, or expose them to artificial intelligence. And we're really convinced, Brandon. I know you and I have talked about this a lot, that for students to properly understand how to deploy technology, they have to be able to think critically first and connect with wisdom, understand the part, how it relates to the whole and first principles. So we believe that classical education's on the rise, and we want to help lead it to its best ends at Great Hearts.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. I was as you were saying that, I was reminded of an event that I was at about last year this time, and there was a lot of talk about technology in schools, and one of the presenters spoke about technology in a way that basically framed it as a kind of moral imperative, that somehow a moral imperative to bring a device in front of students every day, and that somehow students were being let down, right? That a school wasn't doing its job if it wasn't equipping its students with a device to use every day, that you'd send them out into the world and they would be unable to function. And so I of course, had my thoughts about that. But I wonder, when you hear something like that, right? There's something that maybe at first glance, or sort of on the surface, you think, well, that is true. When I look around out my window out there, everyone's on a device. So if we don't have a device, how are we going to succeed in the world? But if you dig a little bit deeper, it seems like there's something that's being missed in that kind of common sense or superficial approach. What do you think about that kind of offering or thought about technology?
I think it's misguided. And when you look at our schools, as our students don't bring cell phones into the schools or classrooms. Many of our upper school students, our teenagers, they have them, and they're digitally current. But they need that space, Brandon. You and I, you and I have taught humane letters, that 2-hour Socratic seminar class that defines our high school curriculum, where the students are engaged in deep conversation with one another about these great books. What is this text saying about what it means to be a human being? And they're looking each other in the eye. They're not looking at a screen. They're looking at the human being across them and dialoguing and reflecting and listening just as much as they're speaking. And that's the lost art of our time. The digital age has eroded reflection. It's eroded conversation. It's eroded philosophy. Now, our students, as you know, over half of our students go on and graduate from Great Hearts, and they go on and major in STEM-related fields, go on to programming, go on to the mathematical and scientific disciplines. And that's great, but they come with the ability to see the big picture, to reflect, to be philosophical, and then apply technology to its best ends, apply the science, the discipline, the techne to its best ends. So, colleges and employers have gotten back to us and said there's something unique about a Great Hearts graduate. They can actually think, not just be a cog in a machine or a little factotum, but be a leader and a thinker. So we need to teach our kids to think first, and then the technology is second nature to them. That's already there, but we want them to be higher order problem solvers.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. I was thinking too, both there's kind of the end result of what the rest of our lives will look like, and when technology is increasingly more crafted for someone who doesn't have to have expertise, right? They're not going to be set at a disadvantage, especially when there are so many hours outside the day and so many reasons why they are using it. I was thinking about this one time, actually interviewing someone who'd been teaching in a school that was a bit different. And the first observation that this gentleman made was, he said, "Wow, your lunchtime is so loud." And I felt a little self-conscious, because I would walk through the lunchroom and people were chattering and laughing, and it didn't sound out of control to me. But I thought, oh, well, maybe my standards are kind of low. And what he mentioned is, he said, no, it's so refreshing and promising, because he said, where he was working before, middle schoolers all ate their lunch in silence and stared at their devices and communicated with them that way. So he said it was actually the silence was eerie, and to be in a place where people are talking and laughing, he said, was really life-giving. And so I thought that was an encouraging way, especially parents, when you're at your own home and you can think like, I just need a little bit of peace and quiet. It's too much noise. The temptation to say, hey, here's a screen. We're always trying to resist that because it's not what's going to stretch them and bring them together. To do that as kind of the default. So I always cherish that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, so many students, when I tour other schools around the country that don't have the reflective and conversational approach that Great Hearts has, they're just not as vivacious. They're just not as alive. And I think, there's a lot of research that shows what social media kind of playing to the lowest common denominator in student relationships has really actually led to widespread depression, disconnectedness by our teenagers. And Great Hearts is just the opposite. We want teenagers to be happy and flourish at school. And then they can go on and live in the digital age as their best self.
Right. No, that's right. Kind of on this note, it's a little bit related, not just the area of technology, but the emphasis in the schools to not bring in what we might call popular culture, or kind of having courses in contemporary events, the kind of happenings of the day. Can you speak a little bit to that? Why? That might sound a little bit counterintuitive, like, hey, there's a hot button political issue right now, or there's a piece of media, right, whether it be a film or some type of musician that has just come out, that's the most relevant for people at this moment. We tend to go the other way and say, no, we're going to keep that out and focus on something else. Why do you think that's an optimal way to educate a young person?
Yeah, this is related to the technology question, because we are really trying to create that space of where the teenager, the child, can get outside him or herself. We all have the context. I grew up here in Phoenix. I know you did too, Brandon. I grew up you're a little younger than me. I grew up in the 70s and 80s here in the East Valley in Tempe, Arizona. And that was my life. That was my context. That was my neighborhood. But what we want to do is expand our students' perceptions. We want them to stand on the shoulders of giants in receiving the wisdom of the ages and participating in that conversation. So get outside of 2023 Phoenix, get outside of 2023 Glendale, wherever that student lives, and get outside just what they are receiving from Hollywood or from digital media, to try to understand history, philosophy, the great thinkers of the West on their own terms. So when we teach Shakespeare, for instance, we let Shakespeare speak for Shakespeare. We don't need to use the latest Marvel movie production or superhero examples to, try to explain a hero in Shakespeare. We let the play speak for itself. And we all love pop culture. I won't go into the bands and music and movies I love. We're not negative about that, but we're just positive. We're not negative. We're positive about what we do to get these students to join a great conversation, a great discussion that has been going on for thousands of years. And so we don't need to seem contemporary and cool to be cool. What's cool is the conversation around these ideas. And, it's interesting, as like students actually like it. They really love this exposure where they can kind of leave their cell phone behind, leave social media behind, and leave pop culture behind, and really build relationships about what's unique about a classical liberal arts education.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And it's so true, right? To be able to have that space that we maybe ordinarily wouldn't follow after, right? We would just kind of go with the cultural flow. That's especially important as children, to have that. And then you're right, be able to make choices as adults that have been based on a foundation that's been formed well. Maybe the last question I have for you here is, it's switching gears a little bit, but it's just even about how Great Hearts is run or structured. And so one thing that does make Great Hearts a little bit unique is that it's tuition free, but the organization is also a nonprofit. So could you just share a little bit about both of those pieces? That it's what it means for the schools to be tuition free, but also that Great Hearts is a not-for-profit?
Yeah, as a tuition-free public school, you need to complete an application. I think we should say a few words about that as we end, because I know open enrollment, which is like kind of Great Hearts' high season of thinking about next year for families with families is coming. But every family, they have to complete an application, and they can attend a Great Heart School. And I think they have to, come through the admissions process. And if there's more applications and openings, there's a lottery, which is a fair way to make sure that as many students as possible have access to the program. But what's so beautiful about this is that it comes down to family choice. Money should not be a barrier. We are public schools, including offering special education, making sure we serve every student who attends to the very best level that we can, that they get access to this program and curriculum. And what's beautiful about school choice, Brandon, like as dads, is this the best choice for me? And so for my child, so taking a tour, talking with you, talking with your headmasters, talking with the teachers is so important. And then the second part of that question, we're delighted to be a nonprofit organization. Great Hearts is a nonprofit organization at every level. And that really comes down to one thing. We pour every dollar back into the classroom. I would say as a dad and as an educator, Great Hearts has the best teachers in the world. We are a teaching organization. The 2,000 teachers that teach in Great Hearts, Arizona, every one of them is committed to serving your child, serving our children as dads. They are exceptional. They are highly trained. They love teaching kids. They're funny. They have personality and charisma. They bring it every day into these Socratic classrooms. So we're nonprofits, so we can direct every dollar back into our mission and to our purpose, and also growing more schools, opening more schools to fulfill our public charter mission, to bring this education to as many families as we can.
That's right. Yeah, there's nothing more meaningful than a truly excellent teacher. And each of us have had one or hopefully many of those, and each of us have had experiences on the other side that shows us all the more why a teacher who loves what they teach and cares deeply for young people is what really builds an individual up and then goes on to build up a community and a society. So this has been really wonderful, Dr. Scoggin. Thanks so much for the time, and thanks for flagging for us the opportunity and importance to get our own children into a Great Hearts School. And like you mentioned, there's always opportunity to apply to a Great Hearts School. Just check it out on greathearts.org. There's easy way to apply, and we do take applications all year round, but the best time to really get in there is during the open enrollment season. So thank you, everyone, so much. Look forward to hearing from you soon. And thanks again, Dr. Scoggin.
Thank you, Brandon. It was a pleasure.